Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are diving deep into a world of million-dollar art deals, A-list celebrities,
Yeah.
and this just absolutely shocking betrayal that just rocked the art world. It's the Lisa Schiff scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and you guys specifically requested this one, so clearly you're interested in art, you're interested in true crime, or maybe, just maybe, you're interested in both.
Right.
But this story is wild. Like, it really captivated me, and I cannot wait to unpack all of it with you today.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really fascinating case. I mean, Lisa Schiff wasn't just like any art advisor out there.
Yeah.
She was a major player in this world, working with some of the biggest names in Hollywood, the art world.
Oh, yeah.
But, behind this facade of success, she was running this multi-million-dollar scam that left, just a trail of victims in her wake.
It's crazy. Like, it's hard to believe that someone at that level, operating at that level, could pull this off for so long. So before we get into the how, let's just set the stage. So for those of us who aren't dropping millions on a Picasso, what makes this world so vulnerable to someone like Schiff?
Well, the art market, especially, at the high end, it really thrives on trust
Oh.
and discretion.
Oh, okay.
Think about it. You're dealing with these incredibly valuable pieces, one-of-a-kind pieces. And, a lot of the transactions happen through these private sales
Yeah.
with minimal paperwork. So there's a lot of reliance on, reputation and personal relationships.
So kind of like a handshake deal, but with champagne and caviar.
Yeah, essentially. That exclusivity and that kind of lack of transparency, it creates an environment where someone like Schiff can really exploit the system.
Mm.
She understood the rules of the game, and she totally used that knowledge, really to her advantage.
Okay, so let's talk about the scheme itself. Now, we know it was a Ponzi scheme, but what made hers unique? Was it
Yeah.
just about moving money around, or is there something more to it?
Well, it was definitely more sophisticated than just, taking money and running. Schiff, she used artwork as a tool
Mm.
to manipulate her clients. So she would, broker deals for them, often at, inflated prices, and then she'd pocket the difference.
Oh, wow.
Then, to cover her tracks, she'd use funds from new clients to pay off older ones. And that created this, illusion of profit.
So she was essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul,
Yeah.
using these valuable artworks as her pawns.
Exactly. What's even more intriguing is, she targeted specific types of art. So we're talking about, emerging contemporary artists, the kind of works that are, kind of hard to value objectively.
Yeah.
So that made it easier for her to kind of manipulate prices and create this sense of exclusivity.
Right.
Yeah.
That's clever,
Yeah.
but incredibly devious. But it still begs the question, how did she manage to fool these, wealthy, sophisticated clients for so long? We're talking about people like Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's where the psychology of the scam really comes in.
Okay.
Schiff, she cultivated this image of success. She was a fixture at all the major art events, like Art Basel. She was always name-dropping.
Oh, yeah.
She lived a lavish lifestyle that, just totally reinforced her, perceived success.
Wait, are we talking like the chartered helicopter rides and the shopping sprees in Paris?
Yeah, exactly. Like that $32,000 shopping spree.
Mhm.
It wasn't just personal indulgence. It was calculated to maintain this facade.
Wow.
Convince her clients, hey, I'm thriving. Your investments are safe with me. It was all part of the illusion.
It's almost like she was playing a character, this whole high-flying art world maven.
Mhm.
It's chilling to think how deliberate it all was. But eventually, those cracks in the facades started to show, right?
Yeah, they did. And it started with Candace Barash, a longtime friend and client of Schiff's.
Oh, okay.
So Schiff helped Barash build this massive art collection, like 600 pieces.
Wow.
But when Barash tried to sell some of her pieces, she realized something was terribly wrong.
Oh, so this is where the betrayal gets really personal.
Yeah.
So what happened? What did she discover?
Well, she realized, along with another client, Adam Scheffer, that $1.8 million from a recent sale was missing.
Oh, no.
And they confronted Schiff, and that's when, the whole house of cards just came crashing down.
So this is where the story takes a dramatic turn.
Right.
Because I remember reading about Schiff's confession, and it all happened so fast.
You did. Schiff, realizing that, the game was up,
Mm.
she confessed to Scheffer, on a Tribeca sidewalk. Can you
Wow.
imagine that? Like your trusted art advisor just, admitting to stealing millions from you in a casual street encounter? Then she fled, leaving
Yeah.
like this trail of panicked text messages, trying to explain herself and promising to, make things right.
I bet that confession was, I mean, a complete shock to her victims. It's one thing to suspect something is off, but to like have it confirmed so abruptly, it must have been devastating.
Absolutely. It was a total betrayal of trust. But before we get into, all the fallout and the legal ramifications, there's one more layer to Schiff's scheme that I think is important to understand.
Okay, I'm all ears. What else was she doing?
Okay. So Schiff would often convince clients to invest in like fractional ownership of artworks.
Hmm.
So they thought they were buying, a share of this valuable piece, but in reality, she was selling the same fractions to multiple people.
Oh, wow.
So she was essentially creating phantom ownership.
So it's like she was selling air,
Right.
but packaging it as a masterpiece.
Exactly.
What happened next? Like, did she try to run? Did the victims go to the authorities?
Well, that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll talk about Schiff's arrest, the legal consequences, and what her case reveals about, the vulnerabilities of the art market as a whole.
This is already so much more complex than I realized, and I mean, it's fascinating, but also kind of heartbreaking to think about the people whose lives were like upended by her actions. I can't wait to hear more about what happened next.
Yeah, definitely stay tuned because it's about to get even more intense.
Okay, so like after that crazy confession on a Tribeca sidewalk, what did Lisa Schiff do?
Well, she may have like fled the scene, but it seems, the weight of her actions kind of caught up with her pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Within like days,
Hmm.
Schiff turned herself in to the authorities.
Wow.
And not only that, she provided like this mountain of evidence against herself. Emails, bank records, you name it.
Really?
It's almost like she wanted to be caught.
That is a huge shift, like from, Art World Insider to cooperating witness all in the span of a few days. Like, what do you make of that sudden change?
It's hard to say for sure what was going on in her mind, you know?
Hmm.
Maybe it was like a genuine sense of guilt, or maybe just like the realization that the walls were closing in and there was no escape.
Right.
But whatever the reason, her cooperation ultimately led to a guilty plea on charges of wire fraud and money laundering.
So no glamorous trial, no fighting the charges, just a straight up admission of guilt.
Exactly. And the sentencing. Well, Lisa Schiff is now facing up to 20 years in prison. Her once, coveted art collection is being auctioned off to repay her victims.
Yeah.
Talk about a fall from grace.
Yeah, that's for sure. It just like such a stark reminder that even in a world of luxury and exclusivity, actions have consequences. But this case goes, beyond just like one art advisor going rogue.
Right.
It really raises questions about the art market itself. You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier how this world operates on trust and discretion, but like, is that sustainable? Is regulation the answer?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Schiff's case has definitely sparked this like really heated debate about, the need for greater transparency and regulation in the art market.
Mm.
Those who advocate for regulation, they argue, that it's necessary to protect buyers and sellers from fraud and manipulation.
Hmm.
They point to Schiff's case as like, a prime example of what can go wrong when there's a lack of oversight.
I can definitely see their point. It seems like common sense. Like if you're dealing with millions of dollars, there should be some like safeguards in place. But what about the other side of the argument? What do like the people who oppose regulation say?
Well, they argue that regulation would like stifle the art market's, unique character. They say it would create all this like unnecessary bureaucracy, make transactions more, cumbersome, and ultimately drive the market underground. They believe, the current system based on, personal relationships and expert knowledge is self-regulating and, that's what works best.
Right. So it's this tension between, preserving the freedom and dynamism of the market, but also, protecting people from being exploited. Like
Yeah.
it's a tough balance to strike.
Absolutely. And there are valid points on, both sides. And honestly, there's no easy answer. It's a conversation, I think, that the art world, and frankly, like, anyone who's interested in buying or selling art
Mm.
needs to have. Like, what level of risk are people willing to accept? And how do we balance that with the need for transparency and accountability?
It's fascinating, really. Just this one case, the Lisa Schiff scandal, has thrown this huge spotlight on like this much larger issue. It
Right.
makes you think about trust, not just in the art market, but, in any system where there are large sums of money involved.
Precisely. And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It's not just about like, art or crime. It's about human nature, greed, and the systems we create and sometimes, fail to create to protect ourselves.
So, we've talked about the scandal, the legal fallout, the debate about regulation, but like, what about Schiff's victims? Like, what happened to them? Did they ever get their money back?
Well, that's where, things get a little bit complicated. While some of Schiff's victims, have been able to recoup some of their losses through, the sale of her art collection, many are still facing, significant financial hardship. And, beyond the financial losses, there's the emotional toll, like the sense of betrayal, the loss of trust.
It's easy to get caught up in the, like, sensational aspects of the case, the lavish lifestyle, the art world intrigue. But at the end of the day, real people were hurt by Schiff's actions. Like, their lives were upended, their trust shattered. That's something we can't forget.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even in the most sophisticated circles with savvy investors and experienced professionals, there's always the potential for exploitation. I mean, the art market, like any market, has its share of sharks.
The debate over regulation and the impact on Schiff's victims, like, it's a lot to process.
Right.
Is there anything else you think we should touch on before we wrap up this deep dive?
There was one more aspect of the case that I think is worth highlighting.
Okay.
Remember how Schiff used those, panic text messages to try and explain herself and promise, restitution?
Yeah.
Well, those messages ended up playing a key role in her conviction.
Oh, wow.
They provided, like this window into her state of mind, her awareness of the fraud that she was committing.
It's crazy how something so simple, like a text message, can become such crucial evidence. It's a reminder that in today's, digital age, everything we do, like, leaves a trace. But, beyond the legal implications, I think those messages also reveal something about, the human element of the story.
Yeah.
The desperation, the regret, the attempt to salvage something from the wreckage she created.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so compelling. It's not just about the art or the money. It's about, the choices we make and the consequences that, ripple outward, impacting not only ourselves, but those around us.
It's a story that just kind of stays with you, long after you've heard the details. It makes you think about, like, your own vulnerabilities, the systems you trust, and the people you choose to believe.
Yeah. You've hit on something really important there. It's easy to just dismiss Schiff as like, this master manipulator or, a criminal mastermind.
Right.
But the truth is, she was able to operate for so long because people wanted to believe her. They wanted to be part of, this world she created with its access to, like, exclusive art, celebrity connections, and, the allure of big profits.
So in a way, her victims were, like, complicit in their own deception.
Right.
Not intentionally, of course, but by buying into the fantasy that she was selling.
Yeah, that's a pretty provocative thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it raises, some uncomfortable questions about, our own desires, the lengths we'll go to achieve them. Are we all susceptible to being, seduced by the promise of something extraordinary, even if it means overlooking, the warning signs?
That's a question that goes, like, way beyond the art world. It's about, human nature, our vulnerabilities, and the choices we make when we're faced with temptation.
And it's a question that each of us needs to, answer for ourselves.
Yeah.
Are we willing to be critical thinkers, to question the things that seem too good to be true? Or are we content to just be swept along by the tide, hoping for the best, but, risking the worst?
This has been, like, a really insightful deep dive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for, sharing your expertise and breaking down this complex case in such a clear and engaging way.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy exploring the intersection of, art, finance, and human behavior. And the Lisa Schiff scandal definitely provides, like, a fascinating case study in all three.
I have to say, I started this deep dive thinking it was just going to be about art and crime.
Right.
But, it's turned into something so much, like, more profound.
Yeah.
This like reflection on trust, greed, and like the human condition. It's
Yeah.
given me a lot to think about.
And that, my friend, is the power of a good story.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
entertain, it can inform, and even challenge our assumptions
Yeah.
about the world and ourselves.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. So, for all of you listening out there, what are your thoughts on the Lisa Schiff scandal? Do you think regulation is like the answer to preventing similar cases in the future? Or are there, other solutions we should be considering? We'd love to hear your perspective. So, feel free to share your thoughts with us on our socials.
And as you continue to ponder the complexities of, the art market, here's a, final thought-provoking question for you to consider. In a world where value is often, subjective and trust is paramount, can any system, no matter how well-intentioned, truly safeguard against those who are, determined to deceive?
That is a question for the ages. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the Lisa Schiff art scandal.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope, it sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to take a, closer look at the world around you, especially, those areas that operate in the shadows.
Because sometimes the most beautiful facades conceal the darkest secrets. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. So, as we wrap up this whole deep dive into the Lisa Schiff scandal, one thing that keeps coming back to me is the art itself.
Right.
We've talked about, Schiff, her victims, the market, but what about, those 55 artworks that were basically used as tools in this whole elaborate scheme?
Yeah.
What happens to them now?
That's a really great question. It's almost like these pieces became silent witnesses to this whole crime. And their fate is, well, kind of complicated. Some of the artworks were seized by authorities, as part of the investigation, while others, they still remain in the possession of Schiff's victims.
So imagine having a piece of art on your wall, but knowing that it was once a part of this whole web of deceit.
Right.
That must be so strange, almost a tangible reminder of the betrayal.
Yeah, it certainly adds another layer of complexity to the idea of art ownership.
Yeah.
And as for what happens next, well, some of these pieces might end up back on the market. Others might be donated or just, held in private collections, maybe never to be seen publicly again.
It's almost poetic in a way, these artworks caught in the crossfire. I mean, they started out as expressions of creativity, symbols of beauty, cultural significance, and then they get pulled into this world of fraud and deception.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that even objects, can have their own hidden narratives, their own stories to tell. And in this case, those stories are, they're totally intertwined with the human drama of the Lisa Schiff scandal.
It's made me see the art world in a whole new light. It's not just about, aesthetics anymore. There's this underlying tension between art and commerce, between beauty and profit.
There is.
Yeah.
And the Lisa Schiff case, it exposes that tension in such a dramatic way. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of, unchecked greed, the fragility of trust, and just that enduring power of art to, captivate, inspire, and sometimes deceive.
This deep dive has been so fascinating, eye-opening, and honestly a little bit unsettling. But it's definitely, left me with a lot to think about. So, what are your final thoughts? Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Just this. The art world can be a complex and sometimes, opaque place. But it's also a world that's full of, passion, creativity, and just beauty. So, if you're interested in exploring this world, whether as a buyer, a seller, or even just an admirer, do your research, ask questions, and just trust your instincts. And, above all, remember that even in the most, rarefied circles, there's always a human story behind every transaction.
That's a great takeaway. We can't, let the actions of one bad actor tarnish this whole world. There's still so much, beauty and wonder to be found.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to thank you for being such an engaged and insightful listener.
Oh, well, thank you.
Your questions and observations have, really enriched this conversation.
And I want to thank you for, sharing your expertise and helping us navigate this complex and fascinating case. It's been a pleasure learning from you.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
And remember, sometimes the most beautiful facades conceal the darkest secrets. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.